The drive up was supposed to take 40 minutes. I know that because I checked it 3 times on my phone before I left the motel in Grayfield, a nothing town at the base of the mountain range where the GPS signal was already starting to act strange, and the woman at the front desk gave me a look when I told her where I was headed. Not a worried look, not a curious one. The kind of look people give you when they've already decided there's no point in saying anything. 40 minutes. That's what the app said. I drove for 2 hours and 20 minutes before I saw the first sign. The road up wasn't on the map, not the digital one anyway. I'd found it in a printed hiking guide from 1987 that I'd picked up at a garage sale 3 months earlier, back when this whole trip was still just an idea I was turning over in my head late at night. The guide mentioned a settlement in the upper valley above the tree line. It used the word settlement, not town. No name. Just a set of coordinates written in pencil in the margin by whoever owned the book before me, and a single handwritten note beside them that said, "Go in the morning, leave before dark." I didn't leave before dark. I'll get to that. The road was unpaved after the first mile. Gravel, then dirt, then something that barely qualified as a path. 2 tire tracks pressed into the earth by vehicles that must have come through years ago, the grass growing back in the middle strip, tall enough to brush the underside of my car. The trees on either side were old-growth pine, packed so tightly together that the afternoon light barely made it through. It felt like driving through a tunnel that the forest had built without asking anyone's permission. I almost turned around twice. The first time was when my phone lost signal completely. Not the usual slow fade where you watch the bars drop one by one. It was instant. Full signal, then nothing, like someone had flipped a switch. I sat there for probably a full minute before I drove on. The sign appeared around the next bend. It was wooden, hand-painted, planted in the ground at the side of the track. The paint was old but still legible. White lettering on dark green. Harrow's Pass. Pupulation, 214. Visitors welcome. Please read all posted notices before entering. That last line was underlined. Twice. There was a second sign immediately behind the first one, smaller, with the same careful handwriting. I stopped the car and got out to read it. Notice to all visitors. This community operates under a set of shared agreements for the safety and comfort of all residents and guests. Visitors are asked to observe the following at all times during their stay. Below that was a numbered list. There were 11 items. I read the first 5 standing at the side of the road with the wind coming down off the mountain and the light already starting to go gold and thin. Rule 1. Do not enter any building with a red door. These are private residences regardless of appearance. Knock and wait at any other building before entering. Rule 2. Do not speak to children who are alone. If a child approaches you and you are alone, walk to the nearest occupied building immediately. Rule 3. The well at the center of the square is not a wishing well and is not decorative. Do not look into it, do not drop anything into it, and do not stand near it after sundown. Rule 4. If a resident invites you to stay for a meal, you may accept. If a resident invites you to stay for the night, you must decline. Rule 5. You will hear sounds from the forest at night. Do not attempt to locate the source of these sounds. They are not animals. I read that last line again. They are not animals. I thought about the thing I had seen at the edge of the tree line, the way it had stepped backward, facing me, until the shadows swallowed it completely. I took a photograph of the sign. Then I got back in the car, sat with my hands on the steering wheel, and made the decision that I have replayed in my head every single day since. I drove in. The track curved to the left through a gap in the trees, and suddenly, without any of the gradual reveal you might expect, the valley opened up in front of me like someone had pulled back a curtain. Green fields, a cluster of buildings, a water tower, a church steeple, a square of pale gravel with something dark at its center, the well. And all of it sitting in the last of the afternoon light, perfectly quiet, perfectly still, in a way that looked almost beautiful, almost. I parked at the edge of the gravel square because there was nowhere else obvious to leave the car and because something about driving further into the town felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Like I'd be committing to something I hadn't fully agreed to yet. I left the keys in the ignition. I told myself that was just habit. The square was bigger than it had looked from the track. Maybe 40 meters across, paved in pale gravel that had been raked into neat lines, the kind of careful maintenance that takes time and intention. The buildings around it were old, timber frames, stone foundations, the kind of construction that doesn't happen anymore because it takes too long and costs too much. 2 stories on most of them. Small windows with thick glass that caught the light and held it slightly longer than it should. Most of the doors I could see were brown or gray or unpainted wood. 3 of them were red. I didn't go near those. The well was at the center of the square, exactly where I'd seen it from the ridge. It was made of the same dark stone as the building foundations. Dry stacked, no mortar visible, maybe a meter across and a meter high. No rope, no bucket, no handle, just a low circular wall with a flat capstone around the rim, and above it, nothing. No wooden frame, no roof. Whatever this well was for, it wasn't for drawing water. I gave it a wide berth, walking around the edge of the square instead of cutting across it. Rule 3 was very specific, and I had already decided, standing at that sign on the road in, that I was going to follow these rules. Not because I was frightened. I told myself I wasn't frightened, not yet. But because when someone goes to the trouble of carving 11 rules into a painted sign and planting it at the entrance to their community, the respectful thing to do is take them seriously. That's what I told myself. There was a building on the far side of the square with a door that stood open and a smell coming from it that I recognized immediately. Wood smoke and coffee and something baking, something with sugar in it. A light inside, warm and yellow. I crossed toward it, keeping my distance from the well, and stepped up onto the low porch. I knocked on the open door and waited. A woman appeared from the back of the room. She was somewhere in her 60s, gray hair pulled back, wearing an apron over a dark dress. She looked at me the way you look at something you've been expecting. Not surprised, not particularly curious, just registering. "You drove up from Grayfield," she said. It wasn't a question. "I did," I said. "Is it that obvious?" "The mud on your car is valley mud. We get it occasionally." She stepped back from the doorway and gestured inside. "Come in then." Off the porch. The room was a small cafe or tea room of some kind. 4 tables, mismatched chairs, a counter along one wall with a coffee machine and a glass case holding what looked like bread and pastries. The walls were covered in framed photographs, black and white mostly, a few in early color, all of them showing the town at various points in its history. The square looked the same in every photograph. The well looked the same in every photograph, but the people in them were always different. I sat at the table nearest the door, which I immediately noticed was not one of the red-doored buildings, and accepted a cup of coffee that the woman brought without asking. It was good coffee, better than anything I'd had in Grayfield. "How long has the town been here?" I asked. "Long enough," she said, wiping down the counter. "Longer than the records show if you know where to look." "Do you get many visitors?" She considered that. "We get visitors who find the road," she said. "Not many people find the road." I asked her about the signs, the rules. I asked it carefully, the way you ask about something when you're not sure whether the question will be taken well. She put down the cloth she was holding and looked at me directly for the first time. "The rules aren't ours," she said. "We didn't write them." I waited. When the first families settled here, the rules were already present, posted in the same place, written in the same hand. Nobody who came here wrote them. They were simply already here. She picked up the cloth again. "We follow them because the families who didn't are not here anymore." I let that sit for a moment. "The ones who didn't follow them," I said carefully. "What happened to them?" She smiled, not unkindly. "They stopped being here," she said simply. "That's all I can tell you because that's all any of us know." One morning they were here. The next morning they were not. No belongings taken. No note, simply not here anymore. I drank my coffee. Outside the window, the light had shifted, dropping from gold into something cooler and more gray. The afternoon was going faster than it should have been. That was the first time I noticed it. The way time moved differently up here, like the valley had its own relationship with hours that didn't match the one I'd grown up with. There were 3 other people in the square when I looked out the window, 2 adults and, at the far edge near the church, a child. The child was alone. I watched it. I couldn't tell from this distance if it was a boy or a girl, standing at the corner of the church building, perfectly still, facing the square. Facing, I realized with a slow crawl of unease, my direction. Facing, specifically, the window I was looking out of. I thought about Rule 2, do not speak to children who are alone. The child hadn't moved, just standing there, watching. The children here, I said, without looking away from the window. Are they? Don't, the woman said quietly from behind the counter. Her voice had changed, lower, more careful. Don't look at it. I pulled my gaze away from the window. My coffee cup was halfway to my mouth and I hadn't noticed. Is it one of the town's children? The silence that followed was the longest 3 seconds I've experienced in my adult life. The town's children, she said finally, are all inside by this hour. I did not look back at the window. That took more effort than it sounds. Every instinct I had was pulling my eyes back toward the glass, toward whatever was standing at the corner of the church, toward the question of whether it had moved, whether it was closer. I kept my gaze on the coffee cup in my hands and focused on the warmth of the ceramic against my palms and reminded myself, very deliberately, that I had read Rule 2 and I understood what it said and I was going to follow it. The woman behind the counter had gone quiet, not the comfortable quiet of someone going about their work, the held quiet of someone listening. After a moment she exhaled slowly, and I heard her move, the soft sound of her shoes on the wooden floor, crossing toward the window. A pause. Then she pulled the curtain across without saying a word, and the gray afternoon light disappeared, and the room felt smaller and safer and more dishonest all at the same time. It's gone, she said. What was it? She returned to the counter, picked up her cloth. There are things in this valley that have been here longer than the town, she said. Longer than the people, longer than the name we gave to this place. The rules exist in large part because of them. The sounds from the forest, I said. Rule 5. She nodded once. Among other things. I thought about the sign on the road in the careful handwriting. The underlined instruction to read all posted notices before entering. I thought about whoever had written those rules, and when, and whether they had learned what they knew the hard way or whether the knowledge had come from somewhere else entirely. I thought about the families who had stopped being here. There are 11 rules on the sign, I said. I only read 5 before I drove in. She looked at me steadily. Then I'd suggest you learn the remaining 6. She produced a folded piece of paper from beneath the counter and placed it in front of me. It was a copy, handwritten, the same careful lettering as the sign, the same dark green ink. I had the feeling this was not the first time she'd handed one of these across this counter to a visitor sitting where I was sitting. Rule 6. If you are invited to the evening gathering in the square, you may watch from the porch of any building. Do not step into the square after the lanterns are lit. Rule 7. The church is open during daylight hours. Do not enter the room behind the altar. The door will be unlocked. Do not open it. Rule 8. If someone in the town tells you their name, remember it. If someone tells you their name twice, leave the building immediately and return to your vehicle. Rule 9. You may photograph the town, the buildings, and the landscape. Do not photograph the well. Do not photograph the residence without permission. If you review your photographs and find someone in them who was not present when you took the image, delete the photograph without examining it further. Rule 10. If you find a note that has been left for you in your vehicle, under your door, or among your belongings, do not read it aloud. Read it once, privately. Then burn it. Rule 11. When you are ready to leave, leave directly. Do not stop on the road out. Do not look back at the town from the ridge. If your vehicle will not start, return to this building, knock 3 times, and wait. I read through them twice. The paper was steady in my hands. I was proud of that. Has anyone ever needed Rule 11? I asked. The last part. Vehicle won't start. Yes, she said. What happened to them? Some of them are still here, she said, and then, before I could process that, would you like more coffee? I said yes, because I needed something to do with my hands. The light outside the curtain had shifted again. Dimmer now. Later than it felt like it should be. I checked my watch and then checked it again because the first reading didn't make sense. It was 18 minutes past 6. I had arrived at what I'd estimated was around 4 in the afternoon. 2 hours and 18 minutes had passed inside this room, inside this conversation, inside 1 cup of coffee and the beginning of a second. It had not felt like 2 hours. The time, I said. Yes, she said simply, as though that explained everything, as though that explained nothing. I folded the paper with the rules and put it in my jacket pocket. I was aware suddenly and with great clarity that the smart thing to do was to get up, thank this woman for the coffee, walk back across the square giving the well its wide berth, get in my car and drive back down the track while I could still see well enough to navigate it. Leave before dark. That's what the note in the margin of the hiking guide had said. The person who wrote that note had known something. They'd been here, or they'd spoken to someone who had. And whatever they'd learned had been distilled into 4 words that I had not taken seriously enough when I read them 3 months ago. Leave before dark. I finished my coffee. I set the cup down. I stood up, and then I heard it. It started low, so low that for the first half second I thought it was the wind, or the building settling, or some quality of the mountain silence that my ears were misreading. But it grew slowly and steadily into something that was unmistakably deliberate, a sound with intention behind it, a low, resonant tone that seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the walls of the building, from the ground beneath my feet, from somewhere deep in the valley outside. Not an animal. What is that? I asked. The woman had stopped moving entirely. She was standing behind the counter with both hands flat on the surface and her eyes fixed on something in the middle distance that wasn't in this room. The gathering is starting, she said. It's not dark yet. No, she agreed. It's earlier than usual. That sentence, the specific, quiet dread of it, landed somewhere in my chest and stayed there. I moved toward the door. I needed to see. I know that's exactly what I shouldn't have done. I know the rules had not told me to investigate sounds or step outside or engage with anything I didn't understand. But I also know that there is a particular kind of compulsion that comes over you in moments like that one. A pulling feeling that isn't fear and isn't curiosity, but something that sits between them and is stronger than either. And it had me by the time I reached the porch. The square was different. The 2 adults I'd seen earlier were gone. The gravel had been raked again. I could see the fresh lines of it even in the fading light, as though someone had crossed it and smoothed it behind them within the last few minutes. The lanterns along the perimeter of the square had been lit, small flames behind glass, and their light was warm and gold and wrong in a way I couldn't immediately name. Then I understood. It wasn't dark enough for the lanterns to be necessary. The sky still held enough light to see clearly. But the lanterns were lit, which meant, according to Rule 6, I was not supposed to step into the square. I stood on the porch and I watched. The sound was still there, still resonant, still sourceless. And then, from the far side of the square, something began to move out of the shadow between 2 buildings. Then another. Then 3 more from the other side. They were tall. That was the first thing. Taller than they should have been, moving with a slowness that wasn't hesitation but deliberateness, the way something moves when it has all the time in the world and knows it. They moved toward the well. I gripped the porch railing and I watched them circle it, one by one, slowly. The sound rising with each rotation, Each pass, each time they completed the circle and started again. I don't know how long I stood there. Time was doing that thing again. But at some point, one of them stopped and turned and looked directly at me. I did not move. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. Every reasonable impulse a person has in that situation, run, shout, step back through the door, do anything other than stand completely still on an open porch in a darkening valley while something that should not exist looks at you from across a gravel square. Every one of those impulses fired at once, and I overrode all of them, and I stood still. I don't know why that felt like the right thing to do. There was no rule that said stand still. There was no instruction for this specific moment, but something in the quality of its attention, the way it had turned and fixed on me with a completeness that felt almost formal, almost deliberate, like an acknowledgement rather than a threat, made me understand instinctively that movement would change something. That stillness was the only correct response to being seen. So I stood still, and it looked at me, and the others continued their slow rotation around the well, and the sound continued to rise through the soles of my feet and up through my legs and into my chest where it sat like a second heartbeat. Then it turned back, rejoined the circle, continued. I released the porch railing. My hands had been gripping it hard enough that the blood came back into my fingers in a rush of pins and needles. I hadn't noticed. I looked down at my hands as though they belonged to someone else, then back up at the square. Then I turned around and walked back inside and closed the door quietly behind me. The woman was still at the counter. She hadn't moved. "You watched," she said. "From the porch," I said. "I didn't step into the square." She looked at me for a long moment. "Good," she said finally. And the relief in that single word was the most frightening thing I had heard all day, because it told me that the alternative was something she didn't want to describe. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. My hands were steadier than I expected. "I need to leave," I said. "Yes," she agreed, "you do. Rule 6 says don't step into the square after the lanterns are lit." I looked toward the curtained window. "The lanterns are lit. The road out is to the north side of the square," she said. "You can reach your vehicle by walking along the building fronts, staying on the porch boards. You will not need to enter the square itself." She paused. "Walk steadily. Don't hurry. Hurrying draws attention." "Attention from them. From everything," she said. I nodded. I moved toward the door, then stopped. There was something I needed to ask, something that had been sitting at the back of my mind since I'd read the rules on the road since I'd sat in this room and listened to this woman tell me about families who had stopped being here, since I'd stood on the porch and watched those tall, deliberate shapes move around the thing at the center of the square. "The well," I said. "What is it actually for?" She was quiet for long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. "It's not for us," she said. "It was here before us and it belongs to them, and the agreement we have, the reason anyone in this valley is still here at all, is that we maintain it, we protect it, and we do not interfere with what happens around it. The rules are the terms of that agreement." She met my eyes. "We didn't write them, but we keep them. And so far, keeping them has been enough." So far, I thanked her. I meant it. I don't know exactly what I was thanking her for. The coffee, the rules, the warning, the fact that she'd pulled the curtain when the thing that was not a town child had been standing at the church corner watching me through the glass. All of it, maybe. The simple human decency of being honest with a stranger who had driven up an unmapped road into something they didn't understand. She nodded once. "Remember Rule 11, she said. I remembered it. "When you are ready to leave, leave directly. Do not stop on the road out. Do not look back at the town from the ridge." I opened the door. The porch boards were solid under my feet. I kept to the very edge of the square, my shoulder almost brushing the building fronts, my eyes forward, my pace steady. Around me the lanterns burned their warm, raw gold, and the sound from the well continued its low resonance, and the shapes moved in their slow circle, and none of them turned again. I reached my car. The keys were still in the ignition. The engine started on the first try. I drove north, back toward the track, back toward the tree line and the long, dark tunnel of old-growth pine and the dirt road that became gravel and then became asphalt and then became the familiar nothing of the highway back down to Grayfield. I did not stop on the road out, at the ridge where the valley would have been visible behind me, spread out in the last of the evening light with its lanterns and its square and its well and its circling shapes. At the ridge I looked straight ahead. I have thought about that decision every day since. The decision to follow the rule, to not look back. Because here is the thing that I cannot stop turning over in my mind. The thing that sits with me at 3 in the morning when sleep won't come and the room feels too quiet and the dark outside the window feels too full. I followed every rule, every single one. And on the drive home, when I stopped at the first petrol station I found and sat under the fluorescent lights, shaking and breathing and trying to convince myself it was over, I checked my jacket pocket. There was a note I had not put there. I read it once, privately, the way Rule 10 said to. I have not told anyone what it said. I burned it the same night. But I will tell you this much, and I want you to understand that I am not saying this for effect. I am not saying this to end the story on something dramatic. I am saying this because it is the truth, and you deserve to know it if you are ever driving through the mountains and you see an unpaved track leading up through old-growth pine toward a valley that isn't on any map. The note was in my handwriting.